You're listening to Big Blend Radio's Lost Angel Travel Adventures Show with Linda Ballou, travel writer and author, and your host, Lisa Smith. So welcome, everyone. Today we are going to do our second episode focusing on life lessons learned from travel. And today, Linda's going to talk about Falling in the Footsteps of John Muir, which is a story in her Lost Angel Walkabout book. All the links for her books are in the episode notes. And she's going to talk about outfitters and tell us a little bit about her time up in the beautiful high Sierras, which I love out there. So how are you?
Fabulous, Lisa, and I'm excited to share this particular story because I learned so much on this trip. I was inspired to go to the High Sierras from reading John Muir's his first summer in Sierras, and he wrote so lyrically about the place, and I just said, I have to go here. I have to go here. So I did go there on a horseback trip. Now, this was before I was a professional travel writer. This was just, a personal bucket list that I really, just had to do. And it was a 5-day horseback trip up into the high Sierras in the John Muir Wilderness outside of Bishop. And in Rock Creek, there's a road that goes along Rock Creek, and the ride begins there. And so it was the first ride out. And so no one had traveled the trail before we were on it. And I was riding with two other women who were very experienced horse people. And the cook was a Grand Prix jumper, very experienced riders, and two Wrangler guides. And we had a mule, Maxine, carrying our stuff. So, we were camping out at night, and it was absolutely ethereal. And when you got up into the high country, you had these, rills going through meadows and, wildflowers, just, lightly blowing in a soft wind, and the air is crystalline and clear, and it's just, scintillating. Is that a word? I don't
Yes.
know. I just know that it was so magical and so beautiful, and I was just so thrilled to be there, and I was enjoying every moment of this journey. We did have one problem. Well, we had a few problems, but one of them was that Maxine, there were lots of bridges that we had to cross over rivers and creeks, and lots of water running because this was the spring thaw. And Maxine fell off of a bridge. Her leg went through, the wood broke.
Oh.
And she fell into the creek with her load. And this was a very serious situation because they had to get the mule out of the creek. It wasn't just because our supplies were on her, but because they couldn't leave her behind alive in the creek. Okay.
No.
So it was a big, big deal. And the two Wranglers were from Canada, had never done this trail. And they were, big, barrel-chested, very strong guys. And they got down in the creek and literally pushed the mule up with their boots on her butt.
Oh
Pushed
my
her up,
gosh. And
got her out of the creek, and Maxine is like shaking and shivering, but we move on, right? So that was one
wow.
incident that happened on this ride. We carried on, we camped out in beautiful meadows, and it was just, all really delightful. It is altitude, so there was that, but I had taken a trip in the high Sierras, the wilderness before, like a test run. I had done like a couple of nights. So I had already learned about altitude and the effects that it had upon me. So I had a drug called Diamox, which just a half a tab of that the first night you're out will take care of your altitude sickness. So on the fourth day of this really, really wonderful, wonderful journey through area that is pristine and untrammeled because, not everybody can get here. It's a roadless wilderness. And we went to this place called Ivy Bell Hot Springs, which was, a real highlight on the trip. So we had ridden all day and gone down to Ivyville Hot Springs. We had been in the hot springs soaking for an hour or so, and then, hopped back on our horses and went up the hill and to our camp, which was at about 10,000 feet. So I was at that point a little lightheaded, and my
Mm.
legs were like kind of rubbery.
Yep.
And I decided to do a little birding while the wranglers were setting up camp. So I just walked a little bit away from everybody and just, not too far, but out of sight of the camp. And I was looking up instead of down where I was stepping. And I stepped into a mossy area and my foot sunk into the rill. And I just rolled over like in slow motion into this log that was jutting up, and it landed right in my ribs. Yeah. So I just was in agony, and I laid down around and the world was spinning and I was like, oh my God. And I was in crawling distance of the Pacific Crest Trail, which is the John Muir Trail in that
Mhm.
area. It combines, they become one. And I could see it, but I had to literally crawl to get to it. And I, was just in absolute agony. I didn't know what had happened to me. I knew that I was in pain. I knew that something had happened to my ribs. And I laid on the trail for a while and I realized that, oh my God, everybody's gone to camp. It's nobody's going to be coming along here to find me.
Oh boy.
So that's where I want to start this reading. Okay.
Okay, great. Yeah.
All right. So
And
what I
ow, the ribs suck, man.
So I was laying there on the Pacific Crest Trail, consoling myself with thoughts about the beautiful day, wondering what I was going to do, how because I couldn't move. I mean, I was literally so. My recollections of the day were cut short when the sun dropped behind the crest, leaving me chilled. I had to get back to camp before nightfall. I couldn't wait for someone to stumble upon me. I rolled over on my left side, trying to stand. I could rise, but not without mind-bending pain. I hugged my body, trying to hold my ribs in place, and staggered to the edge of camp. When I could see the wranglers, I called for help and curled back to the ground. They dropped their axes and came running. Looks like she's bruised her ribs, I heard Jason, the head wrangler, say. Don't move. You don't want to puncture a lung, Linda, our cook said. Her voice seemed far away, even though she was kneeling over me, staring intently into my eyes. Neither of the wranglers had any medical training, nor did Linda or the two girls on the ride with me. After a brief inventory, it was determined that our entire pharmaceutical arsenal consisted of one Tylenol PM. Jason, a big barrel-chested young man, came down on his knee to tell me, it's up to you to assess your situation. He looked innocent, sweet, and scared. As I gazed into his pale blue eyes, buried deep in his full moon face, I felt terminally stupid, helpless, and terrified. If you want a helicopter, we have to send Shane out tonight, he said. How much does a helicopter cost? I asked. Could be a couple thousand. I don't really know. I scribbled authorization for him to request a helicopter airlift on a piece of brown paper bag. Shane hopped on his already tired horse and rode for help. Once back in my tent, I tried to get comfortable but was tormented by jolts of stabbing pain. Linda, an ex-Grand Prix jumper, knew a lot about injuries. You got rolling ribs, she informed me. My ribs were shifting inside their cartilage casement. About
Mm-mm.
every 20 minutes, I felt and heard my bones shifting within my body, accompanied by a shaft of stunning pain that made me moan. The muscles in my right shoulder along my chest went into spasm and I couldn't lift my arm. Through my tent flap, I saw stars sprinkled across ink black heavens. I heard the crackle of a blazing bonfire and the voices of the girls laughing at occasional punchline. I was startled out of my misery when Jason lifted the flap of my tent, blocking the starlight with his moonbeam face. All you're missing out here is about 1 billion mosquitoes, he said. Just lucky, I guess.
My gosh. Oh my gosh. That is
Uh,
not a fun place to be in, you know?
a dog named Lucky. So anyway, this is like a textbook description of a journey that shouldn't have happened. It has all the earmarks of what you don't want to do on an outdoor adventure or any adventure. So that is why I wrote the piece, Not All Outfitters Are Created Equal. And in it, I go over the things that, you should look for when you're selecting an outfitter, which, I was very naive. I just wanted to get into the mountains and,
Mhm.
I didn't prepare for, and I just trusted in the idea that these people knew what they were doing, right? Because
Mhm.
this company had been riding in these mountains forever. But first of all, do your guide well, these are the questions you should ask when you're considering going on an outdoor adventure. Do your guides have basic medical training?
First aid,
You know,
basic.
I mean, any good company, like I'm gonna go to Desolation Canyon with oars now to do a
Mm.
river rafting trip in Oregon. I mean, in Utah, outside of Canyonlands. And I had, and they had, really extensive questions about my medical condition because things happen when you're out there, in the wilderness. You can get sickness if you're not if you can get dehydrated and so on. And you have to be very honest with the company about who you are.
Mm.
You don't want to. They will if it's a good company they will ask you to about your medications. They're gonna know everything about you. I personally carry an EpiPen wherever I go. I'm allergic to bee sting or wasp
Mm.
sting. I've carried it for 25 years. Thank God I haven't had to use it, but it's also because I keep an awareness of insects. I'm
Mhm.
always paying attention to them.
Mhm.
They're part of my
Good
conscious,
idea.
you know. So anyway, the guides should have medical training. They should know how to do CPR. I mean, it is not uncommon for people to have incidents and there's no doctors around. So they should have a medical kit. There was no medicine on this trip. And these young men were from Canada and they were excellent wranglers. They knew about
Mhm.
horse flesh and they saved Maxine, and I mean, they were good guys, and they were good horsemen, but, no medical training whatsoever. So
Mm.
that was bad.
Yeah.
So, be honest with your outfitter about who you are and ask them who they are, you know? So, but most companies these days, because of the liability involved with, outdoor adventure travel, will ask you extensively about your medical condition, but you need to know about their condition. Okay, so the other thing is important is do they employ local guides? So these young men had never ridden this trail. This was a spring thaw ride. The outfitter should have sent them out on that trail. It wouldn't, Maxine wouldn't have fallen through the bridge. They would have noticed that there was rotted wood. They
Mm.
would have fixed the trail after a winter. You do that in your own home. If you live in
Mhm.
snow country, you have to, take care of your property. So to take even though, we were experienced riders, no guarantee that others were or even experienced outdoor people, and for to them not to have maintained that trail and gone through and ridden it at least once before taking a group out was negligent.
Mhm.
So you want local guides who know the terrain, who know the circumstances that you're gonna run into in the trip, and on this, you're totally reliant in this kind of a situation, you're completely reliant on your guide's knowledge. So
Yeah,
there you go.
especially if you, like, hit your head and you coulda it could have been worse.
Well, it could've been this whole thing, I'm a lucky little angel. Look, at the end of the story, I'll tell you why I was so lucky. So, part of your homework should be peer reviews. Now, they all have reviews on their site, but of course, you can't rely on that. You have to go a step further. And there are several different sites, Tripatini, Gorp, away.com. But now these days, I just use ChatGPT. ChatGPT is wonderful for a roundup of information, and any kind of research you want to do on a given trip. And so
Mhm,
I just use the free
mhm,
ChatGPT, and it's full of knowledge and really, really helpful, I think. And so that's something that, you should do before going out is check the reviews, independent reviews, not the reviews on the outfitter's site. And National Geographic Adventure magazine publishes a list of good companies annually because
mm.
things change, you
Yep.
know. So, you want to verify who you're going with. Okay. You want to ask them what organizations they're affiliated with because the good companies will be listed with organizations like Adventure Travel Trade Association.
Mm,
So there, if you're concerned, you can look there. And you want to ask your guy, your outfitters basic questions. You want to know how long they've been in the business. You want to know if they're an established company and that they've been tested. But you want to ask them, what kind of weather should I expect? Because in Alaska, they say there's no bad weather, there's just bad gear. So if you have the right equipment, like I just bought new river shoes, because
mhm.
mine were way worn out and it's dangerous not to have good equipment in good shape. And you want to go through all of your stuff and make sure, and you want to read the packing list very carefully because once you're out there, you can't run to the store.
Yeah, yeah, try your shoes on before you take them, Can
Walk
you walk in 'em?
around, yeah, walk around in the house and, that, Cheryl Strayed in Wild, I mean, she was so stupid. I mean, she was constantly, having blisters and dealing with her feet because she
Mhm.
didn't even try her boots on, I don't think, before she left on, the Pacific Crest Trail hike. Okay, she sold millions of books and it turned out to be a good story, and she's a good writer. But how foolish, you
Yes.
know? When I was reading that book, I kept thinking, "Honey."
You should have called me first.
Yeah, really. So the other thing I think is you want to ask about the demographics on the trip, who you're going to be traveling with. Now, on the Desolation River, it's
Mm,
only going to be two, the rafts are 2 to 3. I'm older now. I'm not looking for huge white water. So I'm not looking to be with a group of, 25 to 35-year-olds who are going to be, wanting to go faster, faster, faster. So my trip is more of a scenic glide, which is suited
mm,
to who I am. There may be children on this because it's not a big white river. It could be a family situation. So there could be older people and there could be children. Or there could, but you see, that's the other thing. You want to look at the demographics of the people you're going to be with, and
mhm,
you wanna take a good look at what terrain you're gonna be going through and the level of activity that you're gonna need to do to take a particular trip, and they will have this in your guidelines, but you really need to take a look at them and you need to assess yourself.
and
The first
read the fine print. This is one of those times you need to read the fine print.
Right, twice. Twice.
Okay.
Because seriously, that it's a one outdoor adventures are so wonderful and I just love it. I mean, but you have to, in order for it to be an enjoyable experience, you have to, think about it. So the
Mhm,
girls who were on the trip with me were very experienced riders. In fact, they would cool down horses at the track. They were those kind of riders. But I went on one trip with this company previously, and there were, novices on the ride, silly people wearing silly shoes. They didn't have
mm,
boots. They didn't know anything about horses. They were just, a sack of potatoes sitting on an animal that could hurt them. And, they do get hurt. But the problem is they hurt other people too because
and the animals.
yeah, and they don't have any control over the animals. The animals can take off with them, and so, yeah, you don't. you want to know, as I say, ask the outfitter some questions about who am I going to be with for 5 days in the wilderness or
Mhm.
whatever on a river trip. And as you know, I love rivers.
She's a river rat
That's right. I confess, yes, I can't wait
and
to
proud of it.
can't wait to get back on the water. So I have a personal preference to use companies that exercise responsible travel, nothing left behind, no trace, and using local guides and, respecting local people, like when you're
Mhm.
going through people like maybe Indian country where you might be meeting people with a different culture, respecting who lives there,
Yeah.
respecting who got there before you did, So, in closing in this situation, I really wanna thank my Wrangler guides because it wasn't their fault that their outfitter did not prepare them for this journey. They didn't
Mm.
have a satellite phone. Shane had to ride out for 5 hours at night on a rocky trail, to get a helicopter for me. So, what happened was he got and he they did save my life. I mean, this extra effort. I mean, so I'm
Mm.
not, I'm grateful that, that they did, right. That Shane was
Mhm.
willing to do that for me. So the next morning, I'm laying on the rock there looking at 2 helicopters circling around. So Shane was successful and 2 helicopters were going round and round and trying to land, but there was no place for them to land. So, Jason came up to me and said, "Well, we're gonna have to go down the mountain now. I've gotta take the girls down. We're gonna run out of feed and so on, but we're leaving the cook with you and, good luck."
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Oh, yeah, so I'm watching these helicopters not land and fly away, and that's when I just really broke down. Up to that point, I was pretty stoic, but at that point, I just went, "My God, this is just too ridiculous." So, the next thing I know there's a band hovering over me, looking down at me and putting a brace on my neck and,
Wow.
lifting me up. 2 guys are there, and they're lifting me up and putting me on a stretcher, and they're carrying me like a block or so more, I'm not sure, I was kinda out of it, to a helicopter where they had landed in a meadow, about half
Oh.
a mile away. So, I'm on the floor of the helicopter with the IV, hydrating.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I look at the guy and I said, "I hate to be crass, but how much is this gonna cost?" You know? And he said, "You got lucky." I said, "Really?" He said, "This one's on us." And I went, "You're kidding." He said, "Yeah, we were in Fresno, we're in the military, and we didn't have anything to do anyway. We're happy to get out of the office. They're not gonna charge me." He said, "But if the sheriff had picked you up, it would have been at least $1,000." And
Wow.
so here's the message. The big takeaway on this is do not go on an outdoor adventure experience without medical
Mm.
emergency travel insurance. Now, that is something that I used to be able to get from Travel Guard for like $65, just that
Mhm.
coverage. But now the companies have started forcing you to buy a bundle. But
Mm.
this trip, I went into AAA and they got me, emergency medical evacuation insurance for like $130 to
Mm.
cover my river trip, which is important because I'm
Yeah.
gonna be in a canyon where if there is an incident, I definitely would have to be helicoptered out.
Mhm.
So I think a lot of people think, "Oh, well, I'm traveling domestically, I don't need to worry about that." Well, you definitely do because most insurance companies do not cover
Mhm.
emergency transport, you
No.
know? I don't know any that do.
Well,
So
there's also actual natural disasters that are going on across the country. I don't know if anybody's been watching, but there's
oh my
wildfires,
god.
there's flooding, there's all kinds of
Yes,
things that
right,
if you're out in the boonies, it it's not like you can just take your car and drive away. You know what I mean?
right.
So those
No.
situations exist.
Right, but I think, like, people say, "Well, I'm going to, Costa Rica or whatever, and so maybe I should have it." But no, I mean, the High Sierras can be very, very dangerous, but can
Mhm.
I tell you, I love the High Sierras. I loved being there so much, Lisa, that I had to go back in my writing, in my book. In the Cowgirl Jumped Over the Moon, my protagonist, Jemsy, she gets her life gets turned around in a lot of different ways. She has a lot of emotional upsets and confusion, and she determines to ride solo in the John Muir wilderness where nature is big enough to for her to release her sadness. And it's just so wonderful there, and the beautiful connection with nature and disconnection with all of the rest of it
Yeah, it
because
is gorgeous.
definitely no internet, and
Mhm.
you have this trip was such a valuable experience for me in so many ways, but not, I mean, yeah, okay, I got hurt, but overall, it was a enriching and wonderful experience. And
Mm,
so when I got injured or when I had to give up my horse and I couldn't, do the horseback world anymore, I worked my way through that loss by taking Jimsy back where
mm,
I wanted to be. Yeah.
mm.
So so there's that.
Yeah, no, no, and to the one point, I mean, it is, and I love that book. You know, I do. I loved reading it because I've been through that area and hiked in that area and adore it so much. Both even the east side of the Sierras is just incredible. It doesn't matter what side of the Sierras you're on, it is heaven. It truly is like heaven.
Mhm.
And just, I don't care what time of year either. Even in the winters, I've been out there in the
Oh,
winters,
yeah.
and it's just, it's magical. But, talking about all the safety things too is like you left camp alone. And that's also
Right.
something that's
I
a
didn't let them
no-no.
know I was going. Who knew birding was so dangerous?
Yeah, really.
Should
Thing
have
also. Yeah.
I should have said, "Okay, guys, I'm gonna take a little walk over here." But,
Mhm.
once again, you
So
learn.
the episodes of lessons here.
That's right, lessons learned, yes.
That's why they always make you sign those things when you go off in the wilderness and all of that, so people can keep track of where you are, you
Right,
know?
at the trailheads, you're supposed to
Mhm.
sign in. Right.
Yeah.
That wa
Yeah.
And you really should. I mean, I was just up in Santa Barbara and at the botanical garden, and I had a little bit of a lightheaded spell and had to just sit down for a moment. It went away, and I was
Mhm.
okay. But, you're out there, and I love being out there, but
Mhm.
you just have to be responsible for your out there-ness.
It's true. And always carry aspirin and a can of Coke,
Oh, yeah?
because if you get bitten by a bee or something like that, it helps stop the reaction.
No.
Yeah, you
Benadryl.
take things like that, or just, but Coke will open your airways too, because some
Really?
people have asthmatic reactions and things like that. So
Right.
yeah, there's things out there. Definitely the medicine part would be more effective, but and then if you have those kind of like low blood sugar spells or something, a Coke will fix you like
Mm,
pretty quick. So
okay.
yeah, no, we've had our moments, trust me. We've had our moments, and when they happen, you sit there and you go, well, that was, why did we do it that way, And it happens. It happens, but the the risk is worth the reward.
Oh, that's right,
Beyond,
absolutely. I mean, I can't wait
beyond
to take this trip, and it's out there, definitely out there. I'm excited because I
beautiful.
asked them for the San Juan River, okay?
Mm,
And they were honest with me, and they said, "Well, the San Juan is not good this year. The river's too low. There's not been enough snow melt, but, we can offer you Desolation Canyon," which I'd never heard of. But now that I've looked into it, it's the largest roadless wilderness
mm-hmm,
left in the Southwest, and it was the home of the Fremont Indians who were contemporary with the Anasazi. So there are all of this rock art and paintings and artifacts in the canyon. So it's going to be a wonderful, totally unplugged kind of thing, which is what I really love, because
mm,
if someone is there and they've got a radio going or, bringing you back, and I'm hoping my group will be like me and be wanting to be, having that wonderful connection with nature and the
mm-hmm.
quietness that enables you to just sink it in, breathe it in. It's going to be great.
And it is a beautiful area.
You start at Moab, which of course is the
Mm-hmm.
same headquarters for Canyonlands, and
Mm-hmm.
it's ironic because one of my first travel gigs was on the Green River, but through the Labyrinth Canyon, and I wanna tell you, Lisa, while I was researching this, I think I mentioned to you before that there was a mountain of uranium tailings there that was dripping
Mm-hmm.
into the Colorado. They've and that was, like, 30 years ago. They have finally remediated it, and it is gone. I mean, it was
Wow,
all
it takes
sorts
that
of
long.
political brouhaha over
Mm-hmm.
it, but finally, it got cleared, nobody wanted to take responsibility, the federal, the state, blah, blah, blah. Now, the next thing I wanna talk on my next episode, I wanna talk about the Tachincini River, Raven River, and the things that are going on there in my hometown of Haines, Alaska.
It's important. It's important. We've got to protect our lands right now.
That's right.
Mm,
Absolutely.
gets me a little riled, so I'm just going to shut up right now.
Well, you're gonna like my next episode.
Okay, I can't wait. Well, everyone, again, all the links are in the episode notes. Linda's article on how to choose an outfitter and all the things to consider, and also her books are there. So thank you so much. We'll talk soon
No,
before
it's
you
been
get floating.
I'm not going till August. I'll talk to you soon, Lisa.
Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio's Lost to Angel Travel Adventure Show with Linda Ballou, travel writer and author. Keep up with her at lindaballauthor.com and lostangeladventures.com. You can also keep up with Big Blend Radio at bigblendradio.com. Now, happy traveling!